Hello everyone, and today I'm going to talk about difficulty settings in games, and I am going to refer to a specific video that I have seen by someone called Epicnamebro. The video is called Easy Mode Do Not Want, and I recommend you definitely go watch it. It's specifically about Dark Souls and the alleged easy mode that was supposed to be in Dark Souls 2. He basically goes through all that. Even if you're not into Dark Souls, it's still worth watching and it's still worth listening to because there's still a lot of very good points that have been made. And I basically want to not necessarily just reiterate the points made on that video, but also to bring up some of my own points. And he also does talk about difficulty settings in other videos as well. For example, there's one about organic difficulties, and organic difficulty setting is it's a piece of terminology that I've never heard before, and I imagine maybe he made it up, but it's a good piece of terminology because it refers to something that I've always strongly believed in when it comes to games, but never really had the term to describe what I mean. Basically, the way that I see it when it comes to difficulty settings is I don't like difficulty settings. Now, I do believe that games, not always, but I do believe that it is good for a game to kind of be more accessible to the lesser skilled players. But I don't necessarily mean by that there should be an easy mode or a very easy mode or even a really hard mode in the game, because I think the difficulty selection process is quite flawed and it's not something that I would really get into. I think there are games that do difficulty selections and they do them well and they have their own unique thing about them, but I will go into that later. But the way that I see it, right, is that the perfect game, I don't know what the perfect game would be like, but I think a really good game would have everybody enjoy it. The hardcore players, the casual people, your grandma. Of course, it's pretty much impossible to try to think of a game that would be well suited for everyone. I mean, I just cannot imagine. Generally, I think if people enjoy playing Candy Crush Saga for 3 hours a day, then I don't want any game that I like to appeal to them, because I think that would just make me like it less. Not because it appeals to them, but because it just makes me question what it would be that would appeal to them. So basically, when it comes to difficulty settings, there's a few reasons why I do not like the difficulty selection when you start up a game. First of all, it's the idea that you know how hard and how easy each mode is going to be. If you are starting a game and it says, "What difficulty do you want?" what it's trying to do is it's trying to say to you, right, we want this to be fun for you, we want to give you a challenge so that it's not too hard so that you can complete it, but it's going to be a challenge. The player really doesn't know necessarily what's going to be the right option for them, because they start up a new game and it goes, "Which difficulty selection?" What are you going to say? "Oh, I'm bad at this game, so easy will be good enough for me." How do you know you're going to be bad at the game if you've not played it yet? So there's that problem there. And also there's the question of, well, in what way do you make it easier or harder? Do you just, like, change some numbers around so that some enemies have more health, or some enemies deal more damage? And even so, the difficulty change is going to be subjective between players. And basically what I mean by that is, for some people, the difficulty difference between easy and hard might not be as big of a jump as it is for somebody else. Because say if, I'll give you a random example, say if you've got a boss where you are the perfect dodger of this boss's attacks, you can dodge all of their attacks without problem, and you perhaps get hit by them maybe 1% of the time. You avoid their attacks 99% of the time. If you doubled that boss's HP, would that boss be twice as hard? Well, no, because the chances are still extremely low, and they're not even, the chances of you getting hit aren't even twice as high, and, well, I suppose they are, overall, but just because it's twice as high doesn't mean you're twice as likely to lose. It might only be slightly increased. I mean, I'm going into mathematics a bit here, but the point is that difficulty settings don't necessarily reflect how people are really going to understand how the game works. And people might choose something that's too hard or too easy, and they might regret it later on. Whereas if you don't have a difficulty setting, they can't have that. They can't blame themselves for picking the wrong difficulty setting. If the game is too hard for them, then I think this is where the organic difficulty selection thing comes into place. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think RPGs really shine, because the fact is with RPGs is the fact that you are able to grind, and the fact that you are able to do other things than just go straight in and beat the boss, to help you to go to beat the boss, that is organic difficulty selection. What that means is that instead of saying, I want this to be easy, or I want this game to be hard, or I think I'm so good in order to be able to complete it on this difficulty, what you're actually doing instead is, as the game progresses, you are finding things and you are analysing whether something is worth the risk or not. Oh, there is this cave down here which has got lots of really hard enemies in, but if I go through that, I'll get this really good weapon. That is organic difficulty, in that you are taking the risk in order to receive the reward. And there is also the question of, is it strategically the good thing to do? Like, is the reward worth the challenge? And that's a different thing. But I really do think that this method is a lot better than the difficulty selection, the modal difficulty selection. I also find, even if a game doesn't have a modal difficulty selection where you choose easy, normal, hard, it does have things in it where it kind of asks you to make decisions where you can't really, there's not much you have to go on. And I find there's a lot with, say, like the Western RPGs, and this quite turns me off, I guess. I understand why they do it, and it kind of makes sense to do something like this early, but I think they do it too early, where you have to decide on things right at the start. Like on a Fallout game, you start the game and it's like, create your character. Where do you want your skills to be? Where do you want to, which traits do you want to have? I think that as soon as you start up the game, you shouldn't be making decisions like that, because you have no idea how good they are. All you can do is make a vague prediction. I think you should play the game for a bit, just not given any choices, but play it for a bit, and then as the game progresses, more options open up to you. So, okay, now you've done this, now you can have the choice between this upgrade and that upgrade. And so I think that way that you can adapt to the game, and you can really feel that you're learning something, and you are growing as a player as your character is growing in the game. And I also think that normal modal difficulty selections are exactly this thing. And I do think that there are a few examples of modal difficulty selection which are very good. But one particular example I'm going to use is East Origin. Now, I have played East Origin and I've done like 5 playthroughs. That sounds like a lot, but in fact I'll explain why it isn't. East Origin works as thus. You have 3 characters to play from, one of them you have to unlock, and there are 5 difficulty modes, which are very easy, normal, hard and very hard, or nightmare mode, the very hard mode is called. And you can unlock extra stuff afterwards as well, which I haven't actually done. But the difference between the different modes isn't just a case of what's stronger, or enemies having more health, or enemies like doing more damage, which that itself has balancing issues, because again you'd have to balance. It's a case of choosing the right difficulty setting for a particular playthrough, so that can help you on another playthrough. So I'll give you an example of this with Ys Origin, and I think this is a really good idea. The only flaw in this system, I think, is that the game doesn't tell you about this, and I think if the game did tell you about this, it would be a lot better, and it would avoid a lot of big errors that some people could possibly make. If you complete the game with each character at least once, then for every time you complete the game, or with a different character on a different difficulty setting, so that's 3 characters, 5 difficulty settings, that's 15 times total, you get bonus SP. Now SP is used to buy abilities throughout the game, and you earn SP by defeating the monsters and defeating the enemies as you play through the game. So say you've got the 3 characters, you complete the game once on very easy with all 3 characters, you've unlocked 30,000 bonus SP. I think it's 30,000, I am running off memory here. 30,000 bonus SP, and then say you play again with one of the characters on a different mode, say normal or easy, then you'll boost that by another 10,000, so it'll become 40,000. Now this is really important because when you play on Nightmare mode, one of the things that makes Nightmare mode unique is that all of the enemies in Nightmare mode give you SP in extremely small amounts, whereas in the other modes, the further you go through the game, they give you more and more SP as you progress. But with Nightmare mode, it doesn't happen. You're constantly getting like 1, 2, or just a few. So when you get to the later stages, you can't get the higher abilities. You just cannot. You might get a couple of abilities on the way, but you just will. Everything, most SP that you're getting is just next to nothing and worthless. The reason this is interesting is because if you were to play through multiple times with the different playthroughs on the different characters, and you were to get to Nightmare mode, and you would start off with so much SP, that starting off SP is a huge boost in comparison to how much you would get over the course of the game. And it also changes the way that you perceive your abilities, because if you think about like a normal playthrough of the game, you will naturally get most, if not all, of the abilities as you play through. You start off, you choose the ones to get earlier, you choose the ones to get later, and you basically choose the order of which you think is worth getting the abilities. But on Nightmare mode, you don't choose the order, you choose the small set of abilities that is worth getting. Because you start with the bonus SP, you start with more SP, meaning that you can spend a lot early on, but because you don't get any, because you get so little, you hardly have any ability to get any more abilities after that. So the early stage of choosing our abilities at the start has a longer effect throughout the game. I think that is really good, and I've got to say that it's a really good system, and I praise it highly because it introduces a new type of gameplay when you play through this Nightmare mode. One big problem I do have is that you're not told about this. I think the game would do a really good job if it did actually try to explain this. Or, well, not necessarily explain everything, but basically tell you that it exists. Because, in theory, it would be possible for people to just, like, say, pick one character and then complete 5 difficulty modes, and then not have any bonus SP. And for them to take absolutely ages to complete Nightmare mode, because they haven't gotten any of the bonus SP that they could have gotten from the other playthroughs. So I think that's where that fell short. But notice that Nightmare mode isn't just the same but harder, and that is what difficulty settings usually are. Again, it is a moral difficulty setting, but it's not so much a difficulty setting, because really, if the game is about playing through multiple times and completing the game to the end multiple times, then what becomes a single playthrough, and I think the same kind of applies with like the Disgaea series, when you think of what would usually be considered a single playthrough, like getting from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, that doesn't so much apply. You're not so much choosing a difficulty setting for your journey through the game, because your journey through the game is, if you are going to do everything that you can, your journey through the game is repeated playthroughs on different difficulty settings. So you're not saying, I want this difficulty, I want my game to be this hard. you are saying, okay, my plan of action is that my first time through I'm going to use this setting. Of course, the game should have, I sincerely believe the game should have explained these mechanics to you at the start. And I also think there's a similar type of thing with Ys, or the Ark of Adaptation, and I might be wrong here, so anyone can feel free to correct me, but the way that I think it is that if you play on the hardest difficulty, then each enemy becomes immune to certain types of elemental weapons, because you have different elemental swords, so they all become immune to different ones. And I don't know how that game works with multiple playthroughs, but I see that as inherently different. And I think another kind of example of this is Final Fantasy XII, the International Zodiac job system, where you can unlock weak mode, where you play the game without leveling up. The fundamental difference is that with these games, it's not simply, I want it to be harder. It's the fact that you are choosing a different setting so that the game plays differently as you play through the game and as you explore the different mechanics. And I think this is similar to organic difficulty selection, because organic difficulty selection is this very thing, where you are playing through the game, and as you come up against things, you've got to think of what's the risk versus the reward. Now, I strongly believe also that it's fine enough having the whole choose something that's bad for you now in order to benefit you in the long run, because, well, how do I explain? Well, that's basically like how RPGs work, and how a lot of games well, maybe not a lot of games, but that's how some games work, and it's a pretty decent mechanic. And I think that they really, in order for it to be organic difficulty selection, it shouldn't just be a strategic decision of, yeah, this thing's harder, but it gives me something that's going to really help me out. I think it also has to be something where you have to really judge your own skill at the game, and so that if there's something that would be efficient if you are better at the game, then that's fine. And I think that's also like where it becomes, like those games where it's not so much easy, medium, hard, it's beginner, amateur, professional, because they provide different sets which cater to different types of people. It's like, again, I think it's like that, and I can back that up more than I can back up simple difficulty selection. But I also think that other than the basic rewards, like, yes, it is cost efficient, I think we can't forget the concept of awards, which is basically where you get something in the game that does nothing but to show that you've accomplished a certain goal in the game. And like trophies and achievements, I think these are the perfect example of this type of thing. So yeah, that's why I think difficulty selection is flawed, and in general, not always, but in general, that is what I think, and how I think it can be improved, and how I think with using an organic difficulty selection thing, the games can just be in general more interesting. And I do think that, like I said before, that games should try to, in general, cater to people who aren't maybe as good at the game, and also cater to people who are like veterans who really know what they're doing. And I think, having things like the weak mode on International Zodiac job system, the Final Fantasy XII Japanese alternate version thing, that's a good example of that. And it's like you have challenge runs on games as well. That's the same thing. But I do think that when we look at the noobs, and I don't mean that like derogatorily, if that's a word, I think when we look at the people who aren't as good at games, and I mean, there are games that I'm not good at, and I would like not necessarily be made easier, but to have content that's enjoyable for me to do. I think if, like for example, if you've got an RPG where you can grind and level up in order to beat a boss, but you don't have to, I think for the people who aren't so good at the game, who do need to grind and level up in order to beat the boss, then that grinding and leveling up should also be enjoyable. But then again, I've noticed you've got people who seem to believe that a game forces you to grind and level up and do all these boring things in order to get stuff, when in fact they are completely dismissing other aspects of the game. Perfect example of this, drawing magic in Final Fantasy VIII. You don't need it for 99% of the game, and people seem to think that you have to do it throughout the entire game because they haven't even considered refining cards and items. It's a bit of a tricky one, but I think I've said everything that I needed to say, and check out Epicnamebro and his videos on organic difficulty and all that sort of stuff. And if you're into Dark Souls, I suppose you could watch those videos too. I would like to play Dark Souls at some point. I do have it, but I just haven't yet. And before I go too far off topic, I'm just going to end it here. So, thank you for listening, and I will see you all next time.